I know it's always a good day when we start with Wagner. My great-grandfather was a good friend of Richard Wagner's. And so I want to thank both of you for that beautiful balance of the masculine and feminine that has emerged. And there's great joy. And thank you so much for the music to set up this talk, because I like to talk about the matrix of ascension, service and alignment for the reappearance of the Christ. Now, this is a difficult subject to talk about, and yet I'm feeling very honored to address you on this fourth day. It's kind of like the fourth initiation, renunciation. It's always interesting. We have this 5-day rhythm before Easter every year, for the most part. So I'd like to talk about the significance of this year, how the preparation for Christ, for the Aquarian Age is taking place, and what the matrix of ascension is about, and what the personal and planetary initiation is about in this context, and especially America's role. Many of you are from America, and this is my chosen field of activity, although I was born in Europe originally. And the importance of this cycle of 2025 that we're working towards, that has always been sort of my goal. I figured after 2025 I'm released from this cycle. And so I'd like to finish then with the new group of world servers and their role, and some light on group work. Well, 2006, if we use the septennial calendar, which is the 7-year rhythm, of course, is a repeat of 1999, the last year of the 20th century, and 2006 is an 8 or a 1 year. And so it invokes the qualities of the first ray, and that is connected with what Christ linking the Shambhala force to humanity. And the interesting thing that I noticed was that 2005, going into 2006, a year after the great catastrophe that happened during that Christ Mass period time, was this year marked by a grand fixed square, which is the square of discipleship. And here are the planets that were involved between November 17th of 2005 and January 22nd within a 10-degree orb. They were 6th ray Neptune and 5th ray Aquarius, 2nd ray Jupiter and 4th ray Scorpio, 3rd ray Saturn, in 1st and 5th ray Leo, and Mars making a very long loop in Taurus, 4th ray being the 6th ray planet. There you can see the planet that was missing, or the ray that was missing, was the 7th ray. And I think this had to do with the bringing in of the 7th ray energy and intensifying that in the collective world disciple. And as we heard, the new group of world servers can be celebrated after Christ Mass. And last year, of course, was the completion of a 63-year rhythm, of a 7-year and a 9-year rhythm. So it's highly significant that we had this cosmological alignment at that time. I've talked before about there was guidance given that the 10 years at the beginning of every millennium, which have a 0-0 in the middle, like two overlapping circles, is a birth canal, which have been called the portal years. This is a time where we prepare the matrix of ascension. And so we can kind of visualize it as a doorway for humanity that we're holding open, or invited to hold open, with a hierarchy. And then there's 3 years of synthesis, 2010, 11, and 12. And it ends then with a 5-year. And the next 13 years, which is a recapitulation, leads us then to 2025. So the question then can be asked, when does the Aquarian Age begin? And I like to phrase it in this way. The synodic vernal point moves in the clockwise direction, as we know, and that defines the ages astrologically. But as the Tibetan has told us, that the Capricorn initiate becomes the world server in Aquarius and the world savior in Pisces. And I like to propose to you that there's an energy moving like two pendulums in opposite direction from Capricorn, so that Saturn, 3rd ray energy, moves through Capricorn, and then in Aquarius, where the 5th ray sign, where Venus is very active as well, then becomes this energy. What you see missing here is the fourth ray, which is humanity. And as the vernal point comes to the end of Aquarius, and as the Christ energy enters from Capricorn with the initiation process into Aquarius, then we see the intensification and all we've heard already about the importance of this Aquarian cycle in world history. So if we can visualize this as an imagination for a minute, as Pisces moving into Aquarius, we're moving from the emphasis of second and sixth ray Pisces to fifth ray Aquarius, with Uranus, the seventh ray planet, being extremely active, which, as you know, right now is in Pisces, preparing Neptune's entry, as Michael just mentioned. So this fifth ray energy, or this 5 energy, is Venus. And here you see a picture from 2004 in June. There you can see, I don't see it on the bottom there, there is Venus actually transiting over the sun, which happens rarely. It happens always at 8 years apart. It happens again in 2012, the year I just mentioned, in relationship to this cycle. And this is very important because it actually has a 243-year rhythm broken down into 113 and 130-year rhythm. And it repeats every 243 years, an important number because it's 3 to the 5th power. And in 1761, the scientific world sent its astronomers all over the world to actually observe this occultation of Venus going over the sun. And that led to the actual first determination of our place in the solar system and in the universe, because it allowed us to then compute the astronomical unit, which is the distance from the Earth to the sun. That's 93 million miles, quite a reckoning at that time. And that set up something for the Aquarian age. So if you kind of go into these rhythms for a minute, from 1631 to 1638 was the first two cycles in this 500-year cycle. You can see by 2117 we'll have that occurring again. And there's wonderful work being done by Philip Lindsay about this. As I recommend his paper, which gives some good substantiation for the importance of the Venus rhythm connected to Aquarius. So if we then look at the imagination where this Venus conjunction with the sun takes place, I hope you can see this. There is the sun there at the foot of this constellation here, which is Ophiuchus, the serpent bearer. Some people have thought of that as the 13th sign of the zodiac, and right underneath that, of course, is Scorpio, the world disciple. And so that's where it will occur on December 10th, 2117. And then on meditating upon this, it was sort of given that there are really 3 stages to Aquarius. The first one might be called the serpent bearer, where we have to really do all the work of transforming the Piscean energy. That's early Aquarius. And then it becomes the water bearer in middle Aquarius, and actually the image then of the water pourer in the last part as we prepare for entering into Capricorn. That's 2,000 years and more hence. The Tibetans said that we move from ambition to aspiration to revelation and realization. And so the whole initiatory process is actually also shown in this rhythm as we move through Aquarius. Many more will be taking the 3rd initiation and the 4th in Aquarius, and we're all preparing for that in this incarnation. So Christ in the Aquarian age will teach us to live life more abundantly, to bring about restoration and resurrection. Those are the keynotes for the Aquarian Christ. And as I mentioned, the Tibetan has suggested 2117 is when this age begins, 111 years from today, or from now, which is 3 times 37 years. Now, in meditating upon this, this is what came through as a way of looking at a calendar of those 111 years. This might be called the matrix of Ascension. It consists of several decanates or decades, 10-year cycles, that actually have a fractal arrangement to themselves. You can see the 3 major rays as the first ray red, blue triangle as the second ray, and third ray triangle in green. And then you see some downward pointing triangles right over here and here, which are 6-year cycles, and then 3 synthetic years here, here, and here. And so that makes up the 111 years. And what's interesting is that these next 10 years set the pattern of this triangular matrix. That is why we're invoking the Christ and our collaboration and cooperation with him and with this Christ energy in all of us today, as done so beautifully. Thank you so much. So what is ascension? Ascension is the process of going, climbing, or moving upwards. In the religious sense, of course, it talks about Christ rising in the heavens on the 40th day after the resurrection. But ascension is a universal process because it's a method of invocation of the lesser individual, group, or kingdom, an evocation of that which is greater or more inclusive or more enlightened. It is really the way in which all evolution takes place. And it's really a process of ascension and descension simultaneously, a dual process, because there's no ascension without descension. Remembering that our work is to redeem the substance that we have taken on out of which we're made. This is not our body, as we heard yesterday afternoon. This is, we are just really renting these vehicles in order to transform the substance of the earth. So the reappearance of the Christ is a rhythmical process. And all ascension deals with spiritual attainment. And at this time, many disciples are in an accelerated path taking initiation. And we have really 19 years to that important 2025 date. My own personal experience was when we climbed Mount Everest in 1981. I was part of the American Medical Research Expedition, and that taught me in the highest place on earth what was involved when a group had to get to the summit collectively and do scientific research there. And I had a lot of visions at that time. That was about 25 years ago. And one of them was to ponder about what this idea of matrix is. Not just Matrix the movie, but really matrix. That was a wonderful analogy for young people to see, and for all of us, really. Very esoteric movie. But a matrix is a situation or surrounding substance within which something else originates, develops, or is contained. That's the American Heritage definition of a matrix. For example, like iron within steel, or the accepted disciple within the group holding that matrix together. But the root word for it is matter. Okay? So the matrix of ascension is really the matrix of continuous revelation, the matrix of esoteric development and initiation of spiritual evolution, the matrix of deva contact and collaboration and cooperation. And it's built through scientific awakening of the centers, the application of the laws of invocation and evocation, and the intelligent linkage of matter and spirit. So this is our work, to create this matrix of ascension collaboratively. So awakening the global heart is analogous with the matrix of ascension being built. It's the collective alignment of goodwill leading to the expression to the will to good, the core mystery of the fourth mystery, when Christ aligned his will with that of the Father, of God, of the universal will. And a great number of humanity are taking the first initiation, many of which we are touching and assisting as we are part of that process of ascension together. That will strengthen the matrix. Now, this, of course, is leading to a lot of hierarchical upheaval, and the Tibetan clearly asked us to participate, saying, provided I receive cooperation from the disciples, can this take place? And the aspirants. So how can we visualize this matrix that is taking place? Well, one way is, of course, to see it two-dimensionally, but it's a three-dimensional structure. And then we can see patterns emerging out of that, interlocking circles, as you can see here, which then become various alignments, geometries, just like groups forming together. They may be in a icosahedral form, connected with sort of the water matrix, or the cubical matrix, the earth element, or as Michael just mentioned, the importance of the dodecahedral matrix, the 12-fold matrix. It's all embedded within it. This is what we can use in our visualizations about it, perhaps. And we notice that crop circles have been appearing with greater complexity as we're breaking through the etheric, as we're communicating with the planetary matrix. And here's just some pictures, just to remind what's happened year after year just in the last 5 years. These in 2000 and 2001. And we can see they're like Tibetan sand paintings. They appear and then they're mowed down after a short period of time, but in that there's communication of what's taking place on the planet as the planet is being initiated and as literally these earth acupuncture points are being activated. They're becoming more and more beautiful. We can see these in 2005, and you can then ask the question, is this symbolic of planetary initiation? Is it a pointer to this matrix of ascension? This is another rendering by a Dutch artist of the ones you just saw a minute ago look like doves. So, is this connected to initiation? So we must talk for a minute about initiation. The first two initiations we know are personal, where the Christ officiates, and after that come the higher initiations, but especially the third and fourth are the transitional ones. I consider the third one the first planetary initiation, and it completes the first or birth initiation. They all seem to complete about 3 later. The fourth, the renunciation, which of course is connected then also with the crucifixion, is where then the planetary logos officiates, and then comes the fifth revelation, or the first solar initiation, or the third planetary initiation, and then the sixth, the decision, or the ascension initiation. And this is why I want to mention these, because we're talking about ascension. And then the seventh initiation, the resurrection, as it's called, or the true transfiguration. Now notice there are some real mysteries, especially from the fifth, sixth, and seventh. The second coming of the Christ is connected with his taking the seventh initiation, and that requires group cooperation to take place. Jesus and Christ took different initiations. It's clearly said that the Christ took 2 initiations in one, the resurrection and the ascension. And he mentions here in the race initiation, these are the 5th and 6th initiations, according to Christian terminology. And yet, he also says that this energy allowed us to anchor that secondary aspect on the planet. That's what the Christ brought, the embodiment of love, not just the law of love as the Buddha brought, but the actual substance of love. And that principle is called love by humanity, but pure reason by the hierarchy. The gospel story tells us about the 5 initiations that Master Jesus took, but the initiation of the Christ from the 2nd through to the 7th, where the 7th left incomplete. And that will be heard at the second coming, of which we are all a part, and humanity is collectively a part. So you can visualize it like this, that even though the Christ energy lived in the Master Jesus for 3 years or less, that in that time it anchored this on the planet. And it took 2,000 years for it to come forth. Now, all ceremonies, trials, or experiences in which one is initiated, purified, or given a name are called baptisms. And we might see all the initiations as a form of baptism. I consider the first initiation of birth a baptism by the earth. We enter the spiritual path on the physical plane in a serious way. That's ruled by the 7th ray. Baptism by water, or the second initiation, is where the disciple transforms themselves and therefore the astral plane. The third initiation ruled by the 5th ray, the baptism by fire. The fourth ruled by the 4th ray, the baptism by air. In the third initiation, release from unprincipled substance, the substance of the lower planes of the mental, astral, and physical etheric plane. By the 4th initiation, we work on the buddhic plane in spiritual love. And by the 5th initiation, which we notice now, brings in the 1st ray, that Shambhala force. It's the baptism by will, wielding the intelligent will of the logos, of the atmic plane of divine will, on the atmic plane. So when we talk about this new ashram of synthesis, and I know there's some controversy around that, but I do consider it also be 1st, 2nd, and 7th, with the 3rd ray also being a part of that a little bit more indirectly, because it's bringing in the 7th ray activity. You can see that based on the initiations that the different the rays rule, that the first initiation, the 7th ray, the third initiation, the 3rd ray, the 5th initiation, the 1st ray, and the 7th initiation, the 2nd ray. You can see all the odd rays are present here. Especially it deals with how birth and revelation and resurrection are especially connected with the transfiguration being central for each initiate on the path. So I'd like to just reiterate the importance of that first ray energy. The ray of 1, 3, and 7 are the rays of the cardinal cross, the cross of the risen Christ. That's the cross, of course, of Capricorn, Aries, Cancer, and Libra, which are all the first, third, and seventh ray signs, as shown in that last triangle there at the top. Seventh, third, and the first then bridges it into the cross of the crucified, or the fixed cross, the cross of discipleship. So as we recognize then this first, third, and seventh ray energy, very important in the cross of the risen Christ, that relates to the fifth, sixth, and first initiations. And Christ at his transfiguration unified himself with the past and the future. And I always thought that was an interesting statement, and the image of Moses and Elijah with him on that mount. And what therefore arises as a question is, what's the difference between past and future karma? What are we dealing with from the past? What are we being drawn to out of our future karma, what we all have? And how is that meeting in the present? And I suggest that Piscean age deals with the past karma predominantly. And that Capricorn, as I mentioned earlier, where the Christ energy, the initiatory energy comes from, deals with our future karma and age yet to come, 2,000 more years hence. And in the Christ in the present is in Aquarius, the Christ in the etheric substance of the earth. But from relativity theory in physics, there is no past or future. They're mere illusions, because my future can be somebody else's past or present. It all depends on the relative motions within the group, within the matrix, within the kingdoms, and within the plan. So from science, we know that there is two tenets that are fundamental that come out of modern physics: emptiness and interconnectedness. Emptiness is really fullness of energy, but the interconnectedness comes from the science of relativity, the science of the large, the astronomical. Quantum mechanics teaches us the science of the small, the emptiness, out of which all is filled with vibration and energy. And these are the same tenets as we have in Buddhism. So Buddhism is very much a part of the future world religion, as is Judeo-Christianity, as is Islamic. When they synthesize, that takes place at the sixth initiation, symbolically speaking, at the Ascension. Now, at the fourth initiation, this baptism by air, which is connected with renunciation, that begins the ascension process. That's what Christ took with Jesus, especially in the Garden of Gethsemane. That's the group-centered expression of the will to good, the active participation and practicing of intuitive knowing for the good of the group, never for yourself, because intuition is not for your own, but for the group good, and destruction of the causal body that takes place then. But remember always this image of Christ in Gethsemane on Good Thursday, the day before the crucifixion, when all the disciples were asleep, and 3 times he went out to ask his 3 leading disciples whether they would awake and stand with him. It was too early then, but now is the time, and you are asked to stand with the Christ. You're asked to open your hearts. You're asked to be in Gethsemane once again, as we all have been called upon. That is the message of this time. Not my will, but thine be done. Our will is the Christ's will when we align in the Christ's heart. There is no shirking of this responsibility for any of humanity who serve in the Christ ashram. Of course, the problem, as was mentioned by Michael and others before, is with the advanced aspirants, because it's Christ's own disciples that are always the challenge. Those who stand closest to the Master are always his greatest liability. It's a fact of the initiatory process. We must all be cognizant of that fact. Now, as we go into the higher initiations, the 5th, 6th, and 7th, we're dealing with the revelation, and then the ascension, or the decision on which of the 7 paths to take, and finally the resurrection, which is also called the true transfiguration. These are then the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd solar initiations. And they're really esoterically, I consider them all to be the resurrection together, because from a Christian terminology, the 5th is called the resurrection. From an esoteric perspective, the 7th is. And he talks about this, that the resurrection is veiled in silence, not much is known. The crucifixion has always been the outstanding initiation connected with the fourth, and the whole structure of Christian belief and religious understanding has been based on this unfortunate Piscean emphasis. But the crucifixion represents the cube unfolded, the cube of matter. It actually represents the triumphant unification of Christ with the etheric matrix of the planet. It had to happen like this. And now Judas is being understood, as we saw yesterday in the news of USA Today. So the Christ then had to enter into the 9 levels of the earth, the 9 hells, to redeem the substance that's held in the earth and transmute the matter in the alchemical process of the Christ initiation and transform the astral sheath of the planet and transfigure the mental field to prepare for that. And that took some time. It took 2,000 years. We're at that point now where that ascension can go forward, and the resurrection and the ascension are a collective process that the Christ is asking us to participate in. So we know that the causal body is destroyed between the fourth, but really completed by the sixth initiation, as he mentions here. It's consummated at the crucifixion, but finally carried to the point of solar perfection at the sixth or ascension initiation. And the sixth initiation is where the Chohan transcends the world of the spiritual triad, enters itself upon the monadic plane. So the sixth initiation, connected with the third ray, then brings the reality, the medium of the coming world, religion, about. That's what we've been preparing for. And it was no greater an initiate than Albert Einstein, who said, the religion of the future will be a cosmic religion. It will have to transcend a personal God and avoid dogma and theory, encompassing both the natural and the spiritual. It will have to be based on a religious sense arising from the experience of all things, natural and spiritual, considered as a meaningful unity. Not too many people know this quote from Albert. The united breath is what we can do. This is what the Tibetan asks of us. Take a deep breath for a minute for Christ in this moment. And feel the united breath of this group in service to the Christ. It is the breath is the law, the breath is the life. And as we breathe the Christ in us, Christ can take our individual will and bring it into the understanding. The very heart of the mystery of the ascension initiation, the Tibetan tells us, is connected with this breath. So we breathe with every breath the resurrected Christ in us. Christ, the hope and the glory. And the resurrection and ascension are the result of the death, of the destruction of the causal body. That is why the gospel story is really the story of Shambhala in a certain way. Now, on this ascension initiation, he said, "Lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the age." He is staying with us because his work is to bring the ascension about of this planet into the status of a sacred planet. And then comes the seventh, or solar transfiguration initiation, the true resurrection, which is called this by the Tibetans, hence, the solar transformation, the third solar initiation. And then you sit at the right hand of God, or the Chohan does, and at that point you become transfigured. Now, Christ is still with the earth. He is not returned back to that high place. He has to take the seventh initiation with all of us participating. And the Buddha and the Christ together will pass before the Lord of the world and see themselves, that is the Maitreya, passing into a higher service of a caliber unknown to us. But that is anchoring the blueprint. That is anchoring the matrix of ascension collectively. So the orientation of the hierarchy is towards that collectively, not to humanity. The students are often thinking, well, the hierarchy is so concerned with humanity. Well, of course, they respond to humanity, but they're always keeping their eye on the ball. That's the work of the hierarchy. That's our work to look upwards, to work towards ascension. And so we could say these whole higher initiations are veiled in mystery. They're part of the central teaching of the Aquarian Christ. They encompass the fifth, sixth, and seventh initiation. And at the seventh initiation, the second coming, literally, Then we leave the cosmic physical plane. Then we start to understand cosmic astral plane, which is the seat of really the vortex of force, which we understand as love. And then bring in the cosmic mental plane and the Shambhala energy that originates from there. But that's way ahead for most of us. We can just do our breathing. And in that breathing, we can cultivate the Aquarian Christ consciousness of unity, of interdependence, of non-separativeness and inclusiveness, of intuitive perception, of intelligent registration of the plan, and through love and self-sacrifice, we build the matrix of brotherhood and cooperation. We invoke service in every breath and freedom from doctrine. I repeat, freedom from doctrine. These are training wheels for the real path of intuitive, telepathic, unitive understanding. All of us are training here, and I guess I always think of the disciples have the most karma, so they got to work the hardest. The other people are working away because they are in their hearts, in many cases, already intuitively understanding the Christ energy. That is the recognition of divinity. So that's what we learned on Mount Everest. We made it through group effort, through clarity of purpose. They were the keys. We could put 7 people on the summit in 1981 and did a terrific amount of scientific research, understood from the highest place on Earth how to bring that fifth ray energy in. And I can reveal now that we anchored the Great Invocation on Mount Everest. So it is being linked now to the highest place on Mount Everest. That was my task at the time. And I'm grateful for that opportunity without understanding it fully at the time, I must confess. And then I took it to Mount McKinley, the highest place in North America, Mount Whitney, the highest place on the continent of the United States, and that triangle was set up since 1891 to be functioning for this ascension process. The fifth ray energy makes possible the first major initiation, the transfiguration, the third initiation, where then it works in 3 ways as a transmuting agent for the physical body, the transformative agent for the astral body, and the transfiguring agent for the mental body. And this allows us then to work with the principle of cleavage as a dominating factor, to cleave away the wheat from the chaff, as it were. That is the personality ray of the Aquarian humanity. And just to remind ourselves that in the Piscean age, the fifth ray rules the mind. That is why so much scientific research is going very mentally focused right now. But notice that in the Aquarian age, it becomes the basic and determining ray of the personality of humanity. And then we have the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th rays as the major rays ruling the personality and the vehicles of Aquarian humanity. And the 4th ray, you notice, then becomes the ray of creative achievement, or the mental ray at that time. It will be quite a different world in 100 years or so. Now, how can we see this from America's perspective? Okay. America, I've shown this chart when I first came here 5 years ago. I used a chart at 4:33 in the afternoon in Philadelphia. And with that chart, when you progress, some interesting things happened. It's, of course, on July the 4th, 1776. But notice that at that time, the sun in America had actually progressed to the moon position of America, which is in Aquarius. And it made a yod with Neptune, the 6th ray personality of this country, ruled by Neptune and Mars, the North Node, which is a point of destiny, and then the progressed sun on the moon. And whenever I see this in a chart, it says initiation loud and clear. The country was becoming a disciple right on the day when a very significant event that affected all of the planet was registered by all of humanity in synchrony, with a great outpouring of sympathy and love for America at that time. Notice also that the moon at that event had progressed to the Pleiades. The central spiritual sun is located there, Alcyone, around which this solar system revolves. The 4th ray moon was very importantly located there. So I believe this has to do with America's discipleship. And in fact, the day after, on 9/12, somebody painted this picture of Christ over the World Trade Center, gathering up all those souls who served from all different races and nationalities that were in that building, who sacrificed themselves in order to anchor this matrix and assist humanity. Now, if we look at America through the cycle of lunations, which is when the sun and the moon come together, it's the new moon cycles, we see that in the first one after the country was founded actually happened in the progress chart in May of 1787 when the first constitutional convention was being called. And if we then plot these on the chart of America, you see that here's the first one, second one here in 1816 every 30 years. And we see that we complete the cycle here again in 2024 with 9/11 happening with the sun having reached the moon position. And notice that 2024 happens in Pisces. That's when the progressed sun of America will be in Pisces. Okay, and then the next year comes the fourth ray, comes in with greater emphasis. Now, if we plot this as a wheel of Dharma in America starting in 1787 and putting those years around, you can see that when 1925, when the conclave took place in America's chart, it was at the full moon cycle. America was to play a major role. That is why America is the superpower, but not necessarily as yet the spiritual superpower it's to be. And then by 9/11, we had that in the release phase of America's lunation rhythm. And notice then it completes by 2024 on April the 3rd, the same day as the crucifixion took place in the year 33 AD. Not insignificant coincidences. So what is the importance of 2025 that we've talked about repeatedly? These are just from various aspects that the Tibetan talked about. The intensification of light is supposed to end, leading to greater stability. The first stage of the externalization of the hierarchy starts to begin. The World Federation of Nations should really be working together through the UN. New teachings of esoteric astrology to be given. Many millions will have taken the first degree if we do our work right. There will be fundamental changes in human thought, awareness, and direction, and a clarification of glamorous illusions and the Maya, especially through education, religion, and economics. These are specifically, whenever you type in 2025 in the Tibetan books, these were what came forward, because the purpose of the Planetary Logos will be starting to be brought in with terrific potency at that time. Now, the United Nations are preparing for this, and it was wonderful to hear Steve Nation talk about that yesterday. I'm especially encouraged that between 2025 and 2015 is called the International Decade for Action on Water of Life. And I believe water will be one of the most important elements that we'll be dealing with in this cycle. Now, what's changed in this new century? We had a wonderful talk yesterday from Gordon Davidson talking about, have things changed on the planet? Well, we all know they have. Has that impacted hierarchical effort? I'm sure it has. We have a whole new situation that couldn't be anticipated. You can always know the plan that is put in place, but you can't know the details of the plan, how it's going to work itself out. That's why God and humanity always work in synchrony. It's a reciprocal principle, you see. It's a principle where the greater affects the lesser and the lesser affects the greater, just like every cell in your body affects every other cell, and they communicate through light in your body. We know this now from physics, through biophotons and so on. So what's happened on the planet is we've had globalization, the internationalization of finance, trade, and commerce. It's led to economic interdependence. When I call somebody up now about some problem with my computer, I get somebody in India answering my questions. You've all had some of those experiences. People in China are deeply enmeshed in America. America is spending like crazy. China is producing like crazy, but we're all in bed together because this is global interdependence. This globalization has many effects. It has led, unfortunately, to a wider gap between the have and the have-not nations. We've had an information revolution analogous to the Industrial Revolution of the late 18th century. And countries who don't have access to this technology are falling behind. We have eroded sovereignty of nation states. Basically, security in countries cannot be guaranteed anymore. This is a direct result of these first two things and the lack of sharing. And as a result of that, the citizen bargain with their countries is starting to erode as we're becoming part of a universal humanity. And the changing nature of war and conflict is leading to what they now call non-state actors, or stateless nations fighting wars, which we have characterized as terrorism, but it might be really called errorism on our part. because we have not seen where we have fallen short in our collective interchange and where we have not addressed the shadow of our own countries. Now, how do these circumstances impact the appearance of the Christ? Remember that crisis is either conflict or decision. Humanity seems to draw down conflict out of crisis all the time, and the principle of conflict is something that doesn't have to be. Crisis can also be seen through the principle of decision, and this beautiful image of the Kuan Yin riding the tiger through. This is the important point to remember. From a hierarchical perspective, it's about decision. Christ showed us that stress or conflict is a matter of perception. He demonstrated it as the principle of decision, not of crisis, in terms of conflict. So America at this point, has new security concerns about livelihood. People are worrying, my patients tell me about worrying about whether they can care for their families, communities, through economic outsourcing, global interdependence, have lost industries and jobs. The environment is affecting many of our patients. They have illnesses from environmental causes, everything from heavy metal pollution to chemicals that are ubiquitous in the atmosphere and the water supplies, drugs and so forth, and energy supplies, of which we're fighting wars now. And American debt is now approaching $10 trillion. We're the most indebted nation in the world. So this is going to have economic ramifications that each and every one of us are being affected by. But let's just talk about energy for a minute, because we are told that everything is energy. And if you think of the vortex, this image for a minute, a vortex can be created through a tangential flow of water in an egg-shaped container very easily. This is the archetypal symbol I want you to remember for water. Galaxies are huge vortices. Atmospheric weather patterns like hurricanes are huge vortices, and we're seeing their impact on our planet. Now we are finding light. The quantum physicists are now finding that light can be modeled as higher dimensional toroidal vortices like this. This is the latest in quantum physics. So are gravitons that connect galaxies together through time and space. They're seen as higher dimensional vortices. So the new energy source will really come out of the energy of water, we're told. And there will be free energy for all the planet, but for that we must control the astral plane because it resonates to the water element. And we will ultimately see a whole new energy production for the good of all humanity. Energy is not a problem in shortage, it's just a problem in sharing. Now, in this country, we've lost our sense of the republic. That term that came from Greece. Citizens who serve their civic duty are part of a republic. There's popular sovereignty. People, not rulers, hold the power. That's what a republic is to be. There's resistance to corruption. No persons or group put their interest ahead of the common good, and a collective sense of the common good or commonwealth. Well, the republic that was founded is not standing too well at this moment. We must assist it in republics all over the world. This is where the matrix of Ascension can best work. So America's Declaration of Independence, dedicated to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then can be reframed as America's Declaration of Interdependence, which is coming, which of course requires that liberty, which is a soul quality, is now expressed as the pursuit of joy, and life, which is spirit, is the pursuit of bliss. So maybe go towards collective interdependence. Now, there are some things that are amping up the energy on the planet. One of them is global warming, the intensification of light we spoke about, more light coming in through the atmospheric ozone holes, which really are part of a plan to accelerate. Everything on this planet brings a lot more cosmic energy from the sun into the planet, even though it's affecting certain life form. Is this leading to a collective global awakening and the first initiation in many? I believe it is, because global warming will have all these effects, from Greenland melting. This is getting more and more consensus by the scientists, to animals changing behaviors, to seas rising 1 to 3 feet per century now. And it may have other possibilities, including perhaps a chilling of the planet down the road. So the mass extinctions we talked about before are part of all of this. This is waking up people, because whenever there's more heat, there's more rising of energy. And I think it's helping awaken humanity to their interdependence, their interconnectedness. It's really part of the plan. even though it was done somewhat unconsciously, in part by all of our industrialization. Now, I'd like to just say a few words about the new group of world servers. We remember what the Tibetans said, that they were really an experiment of fourfold in nature, the starting points for the focal points of energy in the human family, to allow these energies to flow into humanity through new modes of communication, to externalize the inner conditions that existed they are really an effect and not a cause, and they produce a cohesion or one-ment upon Earth through their work. Now, these 10 inner groups that we've known about are really working synthetically to express 10 laws, and that the outer groups that are actually manifestation are tentatively an experimental effort to see, is humanity ready for this? These are the 10 laws that you're familiar with, the law of economy, attraction, and synthesis, as the major laws, and the minor laws of vibration, cohesion, disintegration, magnetic control, fixation, love, and sacrifice, and death. Now, we might ask, as was rightly asked at the previous lecture, as we're moving from 10 to 12, and 12, of course, is the heart, the movement from the solar plexus to the heart in terms of petals, could we perhaps visualize a universal humanity which we can all agree has these 12 different aspects? And you can see the scientific service and science and technology. I just want to point out, the different ones that's added here. The telepathic communicators might work with the media in a whole new way, and the trained observer working through the arts. Of course, the healers work in the health and healing field. These are more, as the esoteric workers, the political organizers in governance and law. So psychology is working increasingly more with global psychology or depth psychology and the environment. The workers in religion working in the spirituality area, the financiers in the business and economic environment, of course the educators. I would put the creative workers here with communities, which leads two other groups, peace and security, and youth. And peace and security is really what we create in ourselves. There will be no outer peace unless there's inner peace. And inner peace means there's a state of dynamic equilibrium with the plan, not a state of quiescence. And finally, youth. Youth is increasingly important. We have seen more and more unusual children appearing on the planet. We've heard they have come perhaps since 1995, some before as forerunners, certainly many more now. I see them in my clinical practice. They are unusual children with unusual sets of psychological attributes and patterns of behavior. Some have called them the indigo children, the dolphin children, the crystal children. Interesting thing is, if they came in since 2025, they'll be in their first Saturn return by 2025. Isn't that interesting, And they're going to be leaders early. These kids don't mince words. They have a very direct connection to spirit. One thing needs to be said about money. Money will actually lead to world release, and the change of thought about what money is, as was pointed out so beautifully by Karina McLaughlin and last year by Lynn Twist, is the key to release on the planet, to real world work. Money is tainted by selfishness on this time, and Christ's work can't go forward. And I love people like Ted Malin, who's written about spiritual philanthropy, how philanthropy is a path of spiritual development in the future. Now, the corporations play a big part in this right now, and what is their role in the impact of the reappearance of the Christ? Well, I would suggest some of these books, David Corton's book, When Corporations Rule the World, or Joel Bacon's work, or even better, his movie called The Corporation, should be something that all of us might do well to watch. You can get it at this website, thecorporation.com. It's an excellent video is where we are at. So in terms of economics 101, spiritual and physical economics, I think the current world situation, which is in dire straits in some ways, we're all interdependent in it, leads to the imminent awakening of humanity. A large part of humanity now stand in front of the doorway to the first initiation. And without this initiation process being understood more widely, I don't think there will be a change in the economic pattern. This is part of our collective work. And the economic and environmental challenges are largely intertwined through governments oftentimes being in collusion with corporate interests, especially in the West. And that has to be rectified and the balance brought about. This is substantiated further with the awakening of the global brain, that a term Peter Russell has coined. It's really the instantaneous network of communication that's now been set up that involves fiber optics, and communication with light, where you can have 60,000 television channels on one fiber optic cable multiplexed together. I mean, the cross networking of information and the neural network of this planet is increasingly accelerated. So now the planet is sheathed in mental substance that's much faster than telephones and telegraphy ever was, augmented by cellular phone networks that are even more widespread in India now than in America. We've fallen behind in that. And this is affecting the waters of the planet. And what we talk about on those cell phones and how we modulate our thoughts and minds is very important. But what's really needed now is the awakening of the global heart. And this awakening of the global heart is, to me, is this principle that was so beautifully outlined by Michael and Tusha a minute ago. And to me, an example of that was in July of last year, July the 2nd, there was this event called Live Aid that was supposedly watched by 3 billion people on the planet. That's the greatest show on Earth, transmitted over the internet. I sat up most of the night watching musicians from 9 countries, including all the G8 nations, and then also Johannesburg, singing music, creating invocation, the will of the young people, saying, let's get debt cancellation done. And a couple of days later in Glen Eagles, when the G8 leaders met in Scotland, they got a commitment for $25 billion more aid every year for Africa that would allow 290 million people to be freed from debt slavery. Now that is discipleship in action. And this was done by these trained observers, by the artistic community, a great event. You can still go to the internet on liveaid.com. So I'd like to now conclude with some light on group work. If we are like leaves on the tree, and the tree is our group connectedness, then the light that goes through this forest of the groups of humanity is infused through the Christ light. And we have some rules that we want to remember as groups to work towards. First of all, group work involves many differences being appreciated. You know, there are many of us with different skills, and we have to find balance in teamwork. Very important that we do this, along with a good dose of humor, good dose of fun and humor. And of course, each disciple recognizes the value of right timing. They have to learn when to take the ball, and of course, cultivate equanimity and balance at all points as we go on the tightrope of the discipleship path. Of course, we value the insight and wisdom of the elder brother and learn to control the astral body. While transforming the glamours, and we know that takes effort. Of course, piercing through illusions is a major key. And meditative focus is greatly needed to help with all of this. Of course, it's very important to express love and gratitude regularly and celebrate important events through rituals and ceremonies, which we are doing here. But strengthening the group heart is perhaps the most important focus for all of us. Thank you for your attention.